questions that we came, the RSVPs that we sent out. So the first question we actually had for you is, you've worked across consulting, public service, and now service strategy at Capital One. What helped you decide when to make a move or shift in industry?
Yeah, so I think for me, my path has not really been one of having a goal in mind and chasing it straight down. I think mine has been much more a path of like trying things, figuring out what I like, and more specifically what I don't like, and then making decisions based off of that of what comes next. For example, the public service thing, that was my first kind of roll out of college. I worked for a small boutique firm down in like the greater DC area. And while it was a decent like first experience for, stepping out of college for the first time, it was ultimately something that I realized I didn't really enjoy. It wasn't The people were nice and like the work itself was all fine, but I think just like the industry of how some of the stuff moves in the public sector and just wasn't what I was looking for at the time. And I think that kind of helped enlighten me of, okay, if this is really what I don't want to do, then it became more clear of what, okay, I got to go do something much different than this. So I joined a company like ZS, which was very different in terms of the clients they had, the sort of work that they pursued, et cetera. And so once I was there and I found, okay, you know what, I actually kind of like this. I got a lot of good experience, got to work with really smart people, really cool companies on cool projects, and enjoyed it. But eventually I was like, okay, well, maybe actually pharmaceuticals, healthcare, it's interesting and I'm learning a lot, but it isn't necessarily the thing that I felt was a natural affinity for me. And so from there is more about, okay, where are the opportunities next that I can start kind of really figuring out not just work that I like, but work that I find interesting and like an industry that I'm intrigued by. And thankfully I managed to find my role at Capital One. And that is kind of, the stars sort of aligned for me in terms of I was looking for something new. My old boss at the time had an opening and reached out to me, and one thing led to another, and that's kind of how I found myself in this role. So yeah, I think for me it was kind of just figuring out what I don't like and then have made decisions based off that.
Yeah, no, that helps a lot. So the next thing that we also want to ask is, in your early career, what helped you build confidence when stepping into unfamiliar roles or high expectation environments?
Yeah, it's really challenging. Even now, I took on a new role within Capital One earlier this year and thought it was very stressful, very uncomfortable. But I think it's one of those things that you have to just be a little easy on yourself, if that makes sense. The thought, I think, especially if you're at a school like CMU or something like that, you're often used to having very high expectations for yourself, and knowing a lot and being really sharp all the time. And it becomes pretty important that, especially when you're new in a role or especially coming out of college, realizing that you just simply don't have a lot of context on what's going on around you, and that's perfectly fine. And good managers would make that clear that that's not the expectation for you. Um, and so a lot of times it's just being willing to feel uncomfortable, to realize that you may not know something or know how something works or who people are. And giving yourself the grace to kind of learn that and give yourself a few months even of just growing and asking questions and not being the smartest person in the room, even though you may be used to that sort of feeling. And so that's, I think, a large part of it. And then as you go through your career and you realize that basically every time it seems, especially for me, every time I feel like I'm comfortable, it's the one, okay, a wrench gets thrown in, something else is changing, and then you find yourself kind of back in a somewhat uncomfortable environment. Usually because you're just unfamiliar with what's going on. And I think as you just get reps doing that and you realize that it's kind of the only way to grow, for lack of a better term. That's kind of the confidence or lack there, that helps me kind of like figure it out is, okay, I've done this before. I got to do it again. I figured it out every single other time in the past. So just kind of leaning on that is a bit of like, you've proved it to yourself before and you can do it again.
Mm. So I know this question is actually not in the slideshow, but somebody did request this, and I think a
Yeah.
lot of people did have a few questions on this. So I know that you work with AI automation and workflow on your day to day. So how does AI actually impact the finance industry in your day to day role?
Yeah, so I think we are very much in the space of figuring out how it can. I think everyone realizes that there's a lot of untapped potential for it, but I think the industry in which you're trying to apply it very much dictates how quickly it can be implemented and tested. Financial, like banks are from a customer perspective, one of the most trusted institutions you have. And so if we just, if ChatGPT rolled out and then we just immediately threw it into stuff and people started interacting with it, it would be really dangerous and really high risk if we got something wrong. So um, it is very much on our like future agenda of how do we start doing these. And we've been testing it in various places. I work in servicing, and I think that is like the first place that pops into people's mind whenever they think of AI. They think of chatbots and things like that. Um, the sort of decisions that get made around that get made at a very executive level, but it is one of those things where it really is hard to go even a day without hearing about it in some capacity. We are trying to figure out how where the really manual processes that exist, not just within our company, but within the industry, and where those can be assisted or augmented with AI. I don't think it's the sort of thing that anyone is like trying to replace full scale parts of their business with, especially at the larger size. But it's all about figuring out how you can so how it supports you. I think it is a particularly strong thing that people have been seeing with like learning new coding languages or technical skills like that, because it is really good. If I ask it for a script and like help with something like that, it can do a lot. So I think those are kind of like the ways that I personally use it on a day to day. But the way that more from like an institutional level people are thinking about it is really wide open at the moment, because I think there is near infinite applications for it.
So could you just describe like your day to day, like from when you wake up to go to bed? I guess is like the better way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, like from the moment I wake up, I tend to get up pretty early. I like to go do something like work out or do some physical activity in the morning, just kind of like start my day. I think that kind of helps me feel a little bit more energetic by the time I do start. Most days during the week, I go into my office. I live in New York City. It is not too far down the road for me. It's about a 10-minute walk. When I'm there, as you will all experience in your career most likely, as you get more senior and you move up and you have more people reporting to you, you find yourself in more meetings. So my day is often dominated by meeting with different people, while also trying to carve out time for myself to actually do the kind of like day to day individual type of responsibilities I have. So I work in a very cross-functional environment. Servicing is massive at Capital One. As you mentioned, Trisha, we have tens of millions of customers calling us every single year. We have billions of customers accessing our digital products, such as our app, our website, the what we call the IVRs, the little robot you talk to before you reach an agent when you call us. And so with that, there's a lot of people who are involved. We have tech partners, we have product partners, we have operations, we have risk, legal, compliance. I'm a business analyst, so that's like my job family. But the kind of like list of people who we impact and who we collaborate with is very lengthy. So that's what I would say I spend most of my day doing is just trying to figure out what parts and what other of the kind of stakeholder environment I'm in do I need to really rely on and figure out what their problems are and what I need from them, and working together to really make sure that like our larger projects are moving forward. To this day, I still do a little bit of like SQL and Excel and do my own analysis just when I can. Those are largely my kind of like technical skill sets more recently. And then I do a lot of slide making. That is kind of the inevitable part of I think a lot of business analyst roles is you got to take what you're analyzing and actually make it into a story. And PowerPoint is often the go-to for people.
Mhm. Makes sense. Actually, that ties into the next question. So obviously, we know customer experience works sets at very much the intersection of both data, design, and empathy. So how do you think about balancing that with people's needs, what the business wants, as well as scalability?
Yes, this is a bit of not a tricky question, but one that it all comes down to like the specific use case, because ultimately I think that everywhere in most industries now, the push is obviously people want digital options. They want to be able to self-service. I think the days of even going into a bank or calling up a bank are for most of our customers, like not their preferred channel. But at the end of the day, we still have to consider them because we, again, at Capital One service, especially with our more recent merger with Discover, are going to be servicing hundreds of millions of customers. So there is a lot to think about of what is best for the business, what is best for the customer, what is best for our agents in particular is something that I do a lot of work with, because especially thinking of like our customer base, the most often time that they are going to be interacting with a human in its counterpart to Capital One is going to be with our agents. So it's really important for us to realize that that is like our customer's brand interaction from like a human to human standpoint. Ultimately, what we come down, what our decisions are made off of is where can we create value. And that can be through various things such as, okay, are we reducing our risk? Are we reducing operational costs? Are we creating better customer experiences, which creates more brand loyalty, which boosts spend and other like revenue streams for us at Capital One. So it really comes down to like the specific problem we're solving, and figuring out what both the customers, how their behavior is today and what our desired behavior is. And ultimately figuring out how we can bridge the gap between those kind of two starting and destination points.
So this is more about your background. You've gone from analyst to manager to leading cross-functional teams. What is something you learned about managing others that have surprised you? And what do you think VS college students should take away from this?
What was the last part of the question? Sorry.
What do you think V as college students should take away from your answer and like actually use it in real practicums?
Yeah. So my advice, and this is something that I've learned from a manager at Capital One that I had, and he talked to me and basically said that in his experience, everyone is going to be harder on themselves than like you will be. So if anyone on your team makes a mistake, like yes, it is important to bring it up. It is important to talk about it. You don't just want to like let errors go without any sort of discussion. But he has always made a really good effort to, whenever he brings it up to me, is kind of bring it up in the context of like, hey, here's everything else that's going on, and like this is a place that we have for an opportunity to improve. And I'm sure pretty much everyone in the room with you is very similar, holds themselves very accountable. And so whenever you find yourself in a leadership position, I think it's oh, I think I'm getting the echo.
Oh, interesting.
Any better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. So yeah, basically his advice was just like whenever I am leading people, don't feel like they will be unaware or like not conscious of any sort of mistakes or learning opportunities that present themselves. And while it is, like I said, important to talk about them and bring them up, always remember that the person you were talking to is probably going to be harder on themselves than you even consider it. So it's always important to like let them know that it isn't the end of the world. Rarely, anytime if you're in the professional environment, unless you're doing surgery or something on it, is anything going to be a matter of life and death. So just being willing to recognize that and know how to provide good coaching and good learning experiences for the associates that work for you.
So I just want to ask anybody in the room, do you have any questions for him? No? Okay, well, we have a few other questions we already prepared. So, looking back, is there a mindset or a value that helped to guide your path even when the next steps weren't clear?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I necessarily realized this when it was happening, but I think especially when you come right out of college, and it can be very scary, kind of joining the professional field, and especially if you are in a role that you don't really like. I think I had this mindset of, oh gosh, I don't think I like this job, and I picked the wrong place, and I'm stuck here, and this is kind of my life, which was dramatic to say the least, and it's something that I try to tell, especially more junior associates on my team, that like if you ever find yourself in a role or at a company or any place where you really are unhappy, there's no shame or fault in like recognizing that and making a change. And even when you are like, if you feel like you are stuck, like you most likely aren't, especially when you're, a year or a couple of years out of college. And it's really easy at that point to make career transitions, much easier than you'd probably think. And I think that even whenever you talk to other people when you are looking to make a career transition, and you're transparent about that, it comes across as a lot of like self-awareness and confidence, because I think people are almost embarrassed to admit that they are looking for a job because they don't like what they're currently doing. But I think that actually shows that you not only it shows that you have a lot of like direction and are looking for the next thing and like excitement potentially about where you go next. So I think that is really, even though I didn't have like a very clear path to where I found myself, like I didn't, when I was at CMU, I didn't necessarily have this long-term vision to find myself at Capital One. I've kind of just made decisions along the way that brought me here. I think it's just important to like be patient with yourself and realize that you don't necessarily need to know exactly what comes next, and that you are ultimately going to figure it out. It just takes time.
Okay, and the last question that I feel like a few people do probably have. So, from the RSVP, if you're not comfortable with answering, that's absolutely fine. But What projects or anything in particular is Capital One actually looking for to try to get a role as an analyst?
I think it ultimately comes down to being able to show that you are able to bring your own frameworks to solving problems. So, like the business analyst role at Capital One is super diverse. We are a company of tens of thousands of people. We do work in the auto financing industry, banking, credit cards, you name it. And ultimately, the type of role you can find yourself in as a business analyst can be super technical. It can be really what we call white spacey and more along strategy and problem solving. Um, and ultimately, there is like a baseline level of you need to be able to show that you have some sort of baseline technical math skills. You don't need to be the foremost coding expert or anything like that. Having some sort of decent exposure to things like Excel and SQL and Python are always helpful. But when it comes to actually like the interview process and what we look for is really along the path of if I'm explaining a problem to you, can you detect what like the underlying issue is? And then how do you take that and then break it down into smaller pieces and say, oh, if I'm doing a case discussion or something, this is a break even problem. And so then we have to discuss, okay, our per unit revenue and then our per unit cost and like how can we change those things? So it's really about not just trying to rush and find the right answer as much as it is how do you take a complex problem, break it into smaller pieces, and start to ideate on the various ways that you can approach it. There are obviously different companies and different roles where they are going to be much more snappy with like, I want to see that you have done XYZ thing. But like I said, at Capital One, we're a really big company and we look for people who are good at solving problems. And we trust that, especially if they're coming, from good schools and everything, that they will be able to kind of figure all the other stuff out as they go along.
Anyways, thank you so much for your time today. It was very, very informational. Do you have any other last advice to the audience?
Nothing in particular. Obviously, Trisha, if you feel free to share my Capital One email, folks, if they have any general questions about the company, the industry. More than happy to share anything else beyond that. But appreciate you having me on today, and hope everyone has a great Labor Day weekend.
Thank you. Oh, it seems like one other person has a question. Do you just
Oh
want to
yeah,
loud?
I can hear like some vague background noise.
Okay, he's coming up.
All right, hi, Stefan. Nice to meet you. I have a question just regarding what would you say your internship cycle was like at CMU? And then also, did you ever have like a change in like career, like throughout CMU, where you're like initially going for this and then you switched into what you're currently in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I had a great vision of what I was going to do. I was a business student at CMU, and my family, my dad was a teacher, my mom worked in sales, so not a whole lot of consultants and bankers discussion going on at the dinner table. So when I got to CMU and I was kind of trying to figure it out, I went to some of the like recruiting things like that with Bank of America and Deutsche, and like trying to just learn what any of the stuff these job titles actually meant. My first internship was with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Actually, I did like a ticket sales internship, which was good exposure, but a bit of a brutal experience because doing any sort of sales is it'll teach you a thing or two, but it's not an easy learning experience. And from there, I actually did an operations analytics internship with Uber, which was a ton of fun. Um, but again, like I kind of just like found myself into that just from like talking to another alumni who worked there and kind of connected some dots. It wasn't like the thing that I was necessarily setting out to do. For me, it was just figuring out, okay, what are like the brands that I like, and then trying to do the research and talk to people as I was going along to learn more about what that was. And then obviously, like I said, when I finished up college, long story, but like Uber was going through a reorganization and my offer got frozen. So I had to find a different role. And that's kind of what took me on the path after that, which led me into public sector consulting and then up to ZS and then where I am now. So it's been a very non-linear path, I would say.
If that makes sense, thank you.
Yep.
Any other last minute question? Oh, just come on. Seems like we have another question.
That's okay.
Hi, Stefan. I had a quick question. What kind of experiences or skills would you say have helped you most in Capital One? Like right now, I'm a sophomore at CMU. So, what kind of skills would you say I should be building right now to help me prepare a career in like finance or banking as a general?
Yeah, I mean, like I think the general like know how to do some analytics and cut up some stuff in Excel, and is obviously I think the kind of baseline is getting more technical as the years go by, and being competent with SQL, with Python, with other coding languages that are often used. I think those are probably the big two at Capital One at least. But I think the one that is probably more ubiquitous is just oral and written presentation and communication is huge. That is one that kind of no matter what role or what industry you're in and you find yourself, it's really important to be able to tell a story, even in a very basic way. I think between that and like I touched on a little bit earlier is your ability to break down problems are kind of the two things that I think are really valuable. A lot of that is big in the consulting world too. It's even if you're working on really big projects, it's often your responsibility to solve something that is relatively minor, and being able to figure out how you can take those bigger things and make them small pieces that are easy to understand for people is really important. And that all comes down to just being able to, like I said, take large concepts and think of kind of like the things that ladder up underneath them.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
Is there anybody else? Yeah, there's one more person also just coming.
Hey, so I just wanted to say thank you again for speaking with us today. I wanted to ask specifically about like your time at CMU. So if there were like any classes that you feel like helped with business analytics specifically, like how did you gain the skills for that? Or was it like outside organizations or like through your career progression?
Yeah, I mean, so I played football at CMU, and I think just like that wasn't like the most important thing I ever did, but it gave me I think a good thing to lean on of like outside the classroom experiences, which I think people really like to hear about of like where have you worked in team environments, where have you had to take on leadership, all of those sorts of soft skills that you can get a little bit in classrooms, but are often a little bit more difficult and are usually easier to acquire in the real world, for lack of a better term. In terms of actual classes that I think I found helpful, um, it's been out for a few years, so I'm probably like gonna say a class that its name has changed in some aspect. But for me, the
Mhm.
one that actually sticks out was like it was I think like business analytics or something like that, and it wasn't that any one thing was like I was able to pick up and apply necessarily, especially right away. But there was a unit in that where they talked about that was related to SQL, and what they talked about was not so much how to like code and how to write, but as much as it was like to conceptualize how databases work, how joining data works, how like you can wind up with a whole bunch of extra rows if you aren't like depending on how you were structuring things.
Mhm.
And so for me, whenever it came, I didn't actually use SQL until I joined at Capital One. So I was years out of college at that point. It made the actual concept of learning how data environments work in practice much easier for me. That was one. And then, I mean, I took a lot of classes. My minor was like international relations or something to that extent. And I thought that those classes were just really interesting because it gives you something to talk about. Because oftentimes, you chit chat with interviewers and get to talk about what you actually find interesting and cool things you've read about and stuff like that. There's really no one particular class or track I think you need to take. I think, like I said, it's often those more broad competencies that are important to have.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. I also did have one more question. Okay, I'll probably just ask it
Sure.
now. I was going to ask a little bit more about like your internship at Uber and like what you did there, how your work was, and like what transferable skills from there you got that helped you throughout your career. And I guess like
Yes.
the process of like how you went into it as well. Sorry.
No. Yeah. So when I was Uber was a much different company then. That was very much still like startup days, to some extent. My role there was I worked on it was called the event operations team. And it really was like much more of a problem solving. I was like the data intern lead for the lack of for the most part. Because what that team was in charge of doing was in like the Southwest region. You have things like Coachella, EDC, you have Dodgers games. You have their job was for really big events that often require a large influx of business from the Uber standpoint. Like, how do you prepare and service those and handle mass egress, especially? And so it was a lot of like not only like how do you logistically figure that all out, but how do you set up like the things so that you have a positive customer experience. So when you have 10,000 people leaving an event all at once, that there isn't just a giant bottleneck, and that you can move people efficiently and safely above all else.
Mhm.
Um, And then the thing that I got out of that experience that was really beneficial was like, how do you actually define success in that? Because a lot of those times those are really expensive operations to set up. So it's not necessarily like, oh, were we in the black or red in terms of like profitability? There's like so much more to actually measure in terms of what makes a particular project successful. So that was one of the things that I really enjoyed was like how that team carved out its value proposition to the company was something that I found really helpful.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to say another thank you for stopping by today. I was kind of curious because you moved around from, service consulting to consulting and now in your digital strategy role. What factors did you consider when you were kind of looking into what industry to go into next? And do you kind of see yourself with this digital strategy role being, what you kind of want to do for a while, or like why, or what else do you want to explore?
Yeah, so I think it can really depend for me. Like when I made my first switch, it was a little bit of like any port in a storm. I knew I wanted to do something different and I wanted something challenging, and so I was like, kind of whatever first opportunity I can get, I want to just go after it. And so that's what kind of led me to ZS. But I think as you move through your career, there's just a lot of things you need to consider. There's what is obviously like compensation's huge. What is your title? Who is your manager? What does the promotion path look like? Where's the location? What is the work-life balance? There's an infinite number of things that you need to consider, and oftentimes like your what matters to you at a given time is going to change. And so like being very conscious of that, and I think not just saying like, oh, I've been doing this for 6 years and I am just going to keep doing it for the next 6 years because it's you get stuck. It's like, okay, no, like what is actually important to me now? um I actually love my role at Capital One. I think it's very challenging and in a way that keeps me engaged. And I also think Capital One has an excellent like culture. I really enjoy the people I get to work with. But for me, it's all like I wouldn't say I will be at Capital One for 20 more years, but like I would say pretty confidently I don't have any intention of like packing my stuff up and going somewhere else just because I think they treat people really well. And I think that it's kind of the place that I find myself right now. But ultimately one day my needs very, very well may change. And then at that point I have to reassess and figure out, okay, is this right? Or should I, figure out if there's something else out there that is a better fit for me?
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that.
Last question. Well, I don't know if you could hear me or not, but thank you again for just showing up. This was a very informative session. For everybody who's here, I will actually track your attendance. Why? Because we're going to be sending out his Capital One email. So you could also email back for any sort of mentorship or questions that you might have for him. Anyways, thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody, and really appreciate the questions. All good stuff, and the fact that you all are even doing something like this is a really good indication of your kind of work ethic and everything. So you should all be confident that you're doing the right stuff.
Well, and